What is up, people? Welcome back to the LMBE podcast, where LMBE stands for literally nothing but everything. I'm Mike Rispoli, and let's just dive right into this bitch. So, I just did a system reset on my computer and my phone, and I lost all of the notes that I was going to use to talk about this week. So, we're just going to have to raw dog it. Oh, you have no idea how upset I am. Fuck technology. But you know what? I gotta say, I think some of it was my fault. Because even though I bought the extra iCloud storage, my computer was saying that my disk didn't have enough space for me to record this. So I was like, okay, let me go in and delete some shit. Let me try and see if I could clear up some space on here. And I must have deleted the wrong shit. So here I am. But I hope everybody had a fantastic week. At least for us in America, last week was a short one. Because we had Labor Day, as I mentioned last week. And I know a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned how, I think we should all transition to the 4-day work week. But after dealing with last week, I'm just like, oh my God. I don't even know if that's even worth it. Because last week, I don't know about you guys, but it just felt like a drag. 4 days just felt like it went on for 4 years. And I just don't know why. I don't know, maybe it's just because we're still dealing with the dog days of summer, but something's got to give here. But you know, the more I think about it, the more I think porn stars might actually have the right idea. Because at least they actually get some physical pleasure by coming into work every day. Ayo! You think porn stars actually have the same types of conversations that we have at the end of the day? Like you come home to your spouse or your significant other, whatever it may be. And it's just like, oh, how was work? And it's just like, oh, I just got fucked today. But you know what? If there was any week that I was going to lose my notes, I feel like this is a good week that it was going to happen. Because there's a lot of stuff that I think we can cover this week. Did you guys see the whole thing with the hockey players who died? What the hell were their names again? Hang on, let me see their names so I can get this right. John and Matthew Gaudreau? I'm totally butchering this name. I'm so sorry if I'm messing that up. But from what I heard, or saw rather, was it was probably like the night before a wedding or something. Something happened where the brothers were together with family. The two brothers ended up going out for a bike ride at around like 8 p.m. So it wasn't super late in the night. And they got hit by a drunk driver. That is incredibly... Oh, I hate when that shit happens, dude. And the worst part about drunk driving is the fact that they charge it as like a misdemeanor, I think. Or it's like a manslaughter. Like, it's not an actual murder. And I think that if, as a society, if we took that shit way more seriously and you actually... Because it really is first-degree murder. Like, you're putting yourself into a situation that you know is not going to possibly end well, or that something could go wrong, and you're doing it anyways. Like, you know that you're purposely doing something that's going to put yourself or somebody else in harm's way. So, how is that not a first-degree charge? Hang on. Sorry, I got to look this up real quick. So, what happens if you kill somebody during a drunk driving incident? All right, according to FindLaw.com, it says you can be found guilty of a misdemeanor or a felony, be charged with negligent homicide or a more serious charge, and end up facing prison time. As you fucking should. But the fact that you could be found guilty of a misdemeanor, like, what determines if it's a misdemeanor or a felony versus homicide? Like, is it based on the BAC? I don't know. All of that just seems so stupid. I feel like the drinking laws just absolutely need to change. There's a reason why we have Uber. You dumb fucks. And by dumb fucks, I don't mean the people listening to this podcast. What I mean by that is all the people who blatantly just go out, get hammered, and then just decide, hey, time to get behind the wheel. I honestly think that if somebody gets caught drunk driving, even if it's a first time, I think they should do jail time. Because you see what could possibly happen. So you got to set the precedent. And I think if you do get caught, I think the first time it's just like a fine. You got to go through driving classes and you have to take a safety course, whatever. Like, it's pretty much just a slap on the wrist. And then the more times that you get caught, the more severe the punishment. Like, I think the second time is when you lose your license. But honestly, anybody who gets caught drunk driving, I think you should just automatically lose your license. And you know what? I'm not a saint. I've gone out to a bar. I've had a couple drinks and then I've driven home. But you know what I didn't do? Was I didn't drink to a point where I was going to blow past the legal limit. Like, guys, you got to do your due diligence. You got to be careful. Don't just think about yourselves. Like, that's the other problem. I think a lot of people are just super selfish and they just think like, oh, it's whatever. Like, I'll be fine. Like, I'll be fine. Yeah, you might be fine, but the person that you hit won't be. So you got to be careful. Like, even in my hardest of party days, I always made sure that I would have a DD or I would Uber. Like, that was the beauty. That's the beauty of our generation. We get to Uber. So what if it's going to cost you an extra $15 to get home? At least you're going to get home safely. Like, you already went out for drinks at a bar. You're already spending X amount of dollars. How much more is $15 on top of a $50 tab or whatever the fuck it may be? Like, my God. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been there where you're having a good time, you're loosening up, and then you get to that point where you have that last drink where then it's just like, oh, well, now I'm just going to keep having another. Like, and then you lose track of how many you've had. And then there's always that one person like, oh, how many drinks have you had? Alcoholics are the only ones that count. And now it's too late for you to try and sober up because what you don't realize is food actually does not help you sober up. Food will help you sober up if you've had it before you've gotten obliterated. If you eat food while you're drunk, you're still going to be drunk. It's just going to help the hangover the next morning because only some of that alcohol has gotten absorbed, not all of it. But yeah, man, I mean, that's why I stopped drinking because I would have too many of those moments where you get past a certain point and you just keep drinking. And I was just like, you know what? It's time for me to stop because this is only going to become more of a problem. And people just do not think that way. Like, even now, I'm just like, I'm afraid to even have a, even though I actually was not a total alcoholic, even now, I just think, hey, if I have one beer, will one beer turn into three and then three's going to turn into a six pack and then a six pack's going to turn into a 12? I just don't even want to put myself into that situation anymore. So that's why I stopped. And if it wasn't bad enough that the drunk driver ended up killing these two people, the worst part is, from what I think I saw, after the funeral happened, one of the wives of the hockey players came out and said, yeah, I was actually expecting. So now this kid has to live their life without their father because some asshole decided, hey, I'm fine to drive. No, you fucking weren't, you dickhead. And I am just so sorry. My heart truly goes out to the family. Like, that never should have happened. It's always an avoidable situation. It all goes back to what I've said previously, the advice that my dad gave me growing up. Don't put yourself in a bad situation. And that was a horrible situation. Here's a thought. I think that drunk driver should now have to pay that woman child support. Because now she's got to raise that child on her own. And on top of physically having to pay for it with whatever punishment they give him, if it's jail time, if it's whatever, I think now he also has to fiscally be responsible for it. But I would be curious to know what other countries do when it comes to drinking and driving. Like, what, is it just a misdemeanor? Or is it actually like a true criminal offense where you actually will have to do jail time? So if anybody has any information about what other countries might do, I really would be curious to know. So you can email me at lnbemedia@gmail.com if anybody has any other information. And I know what you guys are thinking. Mike, what the fuck? That's not funny. None of that's funny. Well, you know what? None of that's a laughing matter. Like, I just thought it was incredibly important to talk about, and I have my opinions. So I wanted to talk about it. Like I said, I also have no notes. So here we are. But you know what? Sticking on to this dark topic, I feel like this is just going to be a dark week this week. Don't worry, I'll get into some sports stuff, make it a little bit more lighthearted. But another thing I wanted to talk about was, did anybody see that after 6 years, Linkin Park got a new singer? Now, initially, I was excited about it because I was just like, oh my gosh, the band finally was able to move on. And when I initially heard her, what's her name, Emily Armstrong? I actually was kind of a fan. I was like, oh, she actually isn't that bad of a singer. I thought she was actually kind of Chester Bennington some justice, but in the end, it doesn't even matter because nobody else likes her. And I can see why. So initially, I thought that all this hate just came from the fact that it was a new singer. Nobody could replace Chester. I mean, the dude had an absolutely incredible voice. So I was just initially thinking, oh, it's just because people don't want to hear change. They don't want to hear a different sound. And that's honestly quite common with bands. I mean, the two most prominent bands that I can think of who changed their lead singer and everybody blew their noses at it was when Black Sabbath replaced Ozzy with Dio. And then the other one I can think of is when Van Halen replaced David Lee Roth with Sammy Hagar. Everybody was just like, what the fuck, this band's going to change, it's not going to be the same, all that stuff. And that's what I initially thought. But, lucky for you guys, I dug into the issue a little bit deeper, and it turns out that the reason why people don't like her, it's not necessarily because of her voice. I mean, people aren't really a fan of her voice because, again, nobody can replace Chester. But I came to find out that she's a huge Scientologist, which, alright, like, whatever floats your boat, fine. You go and do you. But then, she also was one of the people who defended Danny Masterson when his predatory lifestyle came to light. And it's just like, oh my God, how could you defend somebody like that? And not only did she defend him, I read somewhere that she actually intimidated one of the witnesses to not get her to testify. And it's just like, oh my God. That is everything that Chester Bennington stood against. He was not for that. Listen to his music. Listen to his interviews. Like, now it totally makes sense why people are like, how could you replace Chester with this person who just stands against everything that he stood for? Like, it's one thing if it's just because it's due to a tone change, but it's a whole other issue when you get a new member of the band that doesn't even encapsulate the morals of the originality of the band, of what made them. Like, I personally just don't even see this band surpassing the same level of fame that they had before, because when David Lee Roth left Van Halen and they replaced Sammy Hagar, I'm pretty sure every album that Van Halen put out after that went to #1. Now, you can argue that if it wasn't for David Lee Roth, Van Halen never would have even gotten to that status, and that's part of the argument. But even a band like AC/DC, when they replaced Bon Scott with Brian Johnson, the band became more popular. I mean, after Bon Scott died, they immediately go out and they put out Back in Black, which became the best-selling rock album of all time. I think the first album that surpassed it in sales was actually Michael Jackson's Thriller, but even Back in Black was actually more of like an homage to Bon Scott. So, like, the band purposely put out that music knowing it was going to be in a remembrance album to him. And that's why I also think the last album that AC/DC put out, I think it was called Power Up, was so good because it was actually in remembrance to Malcolm Young, who had previously just left the band. I don't even know if he had died at that point because he suffered with dementia for so many years. But once he passed, then I think his son or somebody took over for him in the band, and then they put out Power Up. And that album, if you haven't listened to it, it's fantastic. I mean, it is just like, honestly, it is Back in Black level good, I think. There are so many hits on that album. Witch's Spell, Shot in the Dark, Kick Me When You're Down. They're all fucking bangers. But honestly, I think that Linkin Park should have taken the Led Zeppelin route, or they shouldn't have got back together, because Led Zeppelin knew that without John Bonham, they were not going to be the same band. And I also think they didn't reband with a new drummer because I think they promised Bonham's family that they wouldn't. So I think there was a personal thing with that as well. Oh my God, speaking of John Bonham, did you guys ever hear what Ginger Baker said about him? Where he was like, yeah, he's got good technique, but he couldn't swing a sack of shit. Oh my God. But yeah, no, I don't think Linkin Park should have regrouped with the new singer. I think if anything, they probably should have just regrouped themselves as a totally new band rather than calling themselves Linkin Park. Because it's not going to be the same band, especially if this singer doesn't hold the same morals. So, I don't know. I don't know what the new songs are going to be, but I can tell you, I don't think I'm going to be listening to them now because I just can't bring myself to listen to somebody who has those types of viewpoints. Like, it's the same reason why I don't listen to Chris Brown. I just can't get involved with that shit. But here's something I can get behind. My New England Patriots had the upset of the week, beating the friggin' Cincinnati Bengals. I say this as if I own the team, but who in their right mind would have thought that would have happened? That was an awesome game. I gotta be honest. Jacoby Brissett, initially going into the season, seeing what he was doing in preseason, I was just like, this dude is not it. But when the Bengals were playing zone, he was able to find the open guy. He made really good decisions. I was really happy with what I saw. He almost had that one pick in the end zone, but thank God Henry was able to punch the ball out before the guy was able to catch it. So, mistake avoided. I think the only penalty that the Pats had was actually on that opening kickoff with the flag because the guy moved too early. But holy shit, that new opening kickoff rule is such dog water. I don't even understand what the rule is. And why, when it's a touchback, is the ball brought out to the 30 and not the 25? That doesn't make any sense. And also, considering the fact of where the players are lined up on the field during the opening kickoff, why is the kicker kicking it at the 30? Why aren't they kicking it at the 25? I would think that you would want to see more run backs, but if that was the only mistake that the Pats made, I can live with it because they ended up pulling out the win. And I was more than happy to see that. I think that this Pats defense is a top 5 from what I saw. I mean, how many turnovers did they get? And Gonzalez was able to just totally shut Jamar Chase down. It was just such a great game. My only real problem that I saw was that they played way too conservative. Now, Ramondre Stevenson looked like a fucking dog running over that defense. But I wish that they kind of opened up the playbook a little bit. They took a couple deep shots, but I don't think it was enough to make the Bengals defense totally uneasy. And they got to learn that they can't just settle for the 3 points. Now, I understand you want to take the points when you can get them, but just kicking field goals is not going to win you games against a high-powered offense like the Dolphins or the Cowboys. I mean, oh my gosh, could we talk about the Cowboys for a second? I know I gave their fan base some shit either last week or a couple weeks ago, but the Cowboys just did exactly to the Browns what Deshaun Watson did to those women. Oh my gosh. Deshaun Watson looked like he's the 32nd best quarterback in the league. That dude can no longer football. And I was more than happy to see it because as much as there are players on that Browns team that I do like Amari Cooper and Myles Garrett, I just cannot stand Deshaun Watson, and it's the reason why I'm never going to root for that team. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. That dude shouldn't even be able to smell a hot dog in the stadium. He shouldn't get close, let alone even step on a blade of grass on that stadium. But the Browns are just notoriously stupid getting rid of Baker for a guy like him, knowing all of the issues that he had off the field. Dude didn't even play for 2 years, and now it's really showing. He had that arm injury or that shoulder injury last year. And I mean, you have all those weapons on that team and you just cannot get the ball downfield. Serves you fucking right. But the other reason I was actually interested in watching that game is because that was Brady's debut as a color commentator. And oh man, was that a rough one. Oh my gosh. There was way too much silence in that game. I think at one point, just to even get Brady to talk, Kevin Burkhardt asked a question. I can't remember what it was, but at the end of it, he just goes, right? And I gotta say, I didn't even really watch that full game just because it was ending up being a blowout. So I was like, all right, I'm going to turn this off. But in that first half alone, it was like the only words of wisdom that Brady could give was, you know, in the NFL, it's really hard to move the ball forward. And if you're just going backwards, that's not going to win you games. Like, oh, really, Nostradamus? You mean I have to move the ball forward in order to gain yards? Because gaining yards is what's ultimately going to get me in the end zone? Really? That's your whole 23 years in the NFL. That's all you have to say? No. Tell me what you see as a quarterback. What matchups do you like? Why did the play break down? Be more like how Tony Romo was in his first year. Like, predict some plays. Early in the game, I think the Browns tried to go for it on like 4th and 2. They ended up getting stopped. But it's like, tell me why the play broke down. Tell me what you see. Based on the defensive coverage that you saw the Cowboys doing, do you think it would make more sense for them to run the ball? Do they maybe put Jerry Jeudy in a slot position? They throw him a quick slant to try and pick up the first? Like, give me something. I remember on like one of the first kickoffs, I don't know if it was a kickoff or it was a punt, Brady was like, oh yeah, I played with that guy. He's really tough. It's like, I don't give a fuck who you played with and how tough he is. Tell me what you see. You played with probably 40% of the players in the league with how long you played. Use that quarterback mind. Break down the plays. Like, I wanted to know how you felt about the matchup between Trayvon Diggs and Amari Cooper. I don't even know if that's the correct matchup that they even had, but that's what I wanted to hear. Now, granted, it was Brady's first game as a color commentator, so maybe he's just trying to figure out his footing, but the dude, he had no cadence to his voice. It was like me doing this podcast, just random pauses. You guys have no idea how much editing goes into these things. But it's Brady. The dude is a workhorse. He's always trying to hone his craft. And if this is what his new craft is, I do expect him to be great. I think you just got to give him maybe like a few weeks to get adjusted. So we'll see how that goes. And I think you guys are probably expecting me to talk about the Kansas City Swifties, but I actually ended up having to work the bar Thursday night, so I couldn't really watch the game. But I think Lamar just tends to make bad decisions. I mean, there was one play where he was just really trying to scramble, trying to find somebody open. I think it was a second down or something. I really can't remember because I also wasn't really watching. But it's like, dude, if nobody's open and you really got to scramble that much, just throw the ball away. Just take the down. And I was really hoping that the Ravens would end up pulling out that game, but they ultimately didn't just because the guy couldn't get his toes in. That was crazy. That was totally a game of inches from what I saw. But that was a tough loss. Again, the Chiefs are just destined to win. Can somebody please explain to me, though, how that Chiefs right tackle, he's backed up behind the line. He's not even in line with the center, which is a penalty. But then not only that, but he also false starts. And how that is never called just boggles my mind. So I guess it just is what it is. But in other news that excites me, Tampa ended up winning their game, so I'm still alive in my survivor pool. So now I'm trying to think of who I'm going to pick next week. I think the matchups next week that I'm seeing are the Jets and the Chargers. Those are really the only two teams that stand out to me as to what's going to keep me alive. But based on how the Jets played tonight, I don't really know if I trust them just yet. I think they're still trying to find their identity. So I think I'm going to be going with the Chargers. I don't know if I want to touch the Bears yet because the defense is ultimately who put up a lot of their points, and I just don't really know. I think Caleb is a really good talent. I just don't know if he's quite acclimated to the NFL level yet. So until the Bears actually can find out their identity and we figure out who they are, I don't think I'm going to touch them either. So, I don't know. I'm also trying to look ahead at who other teams are playing. Because, again, I think the Titans, the Commanders, and the Giants are going to be the teams to beat this year. So I'm also looking at any teams that are going to play against them. And if there are matchups later on down the line that I like more than what I'm seeing this current week. So we'll see. But if anybody has any other options for me on who they think I should pick this week, let me know. But alright guys, I think that does it for me this week. If you guys like this episode, please share it with a friend. Like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Throw me a comment, write up a review, give me that 5-star rating. And then if you also guys want to check me out on my socials, you can do so at the LMBE Pod on TikTok and Instagram. You can also find me on YouTube. And also, don't forget, if you guys want to write in, feel free to do so. You can reach out at lnbemedia@gmail.com. Alright guys, I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I will catch up with you next Tuesday. Thanks for listening.